The arena of Zalora Prime was unlike anything the universe had ever witnessed. A colossal floating structure suspended in the heart of a swirling nebula, where the stars themselves seemed to bow in reverence. Its walls, forged from the remains of shattered moons, reflected the shimmering lights of distant galaxies, casting a kaleidoscope of colors that danced across the skies. Above, the massive, twin suns of Zalora set in perfect synchrony, bathing the arena in a golden hue that made the entire spectacle seem like a dream. At the center of this otherworldly coliseum, a sacred ritual known as the Zenith Clash was about to unfold. This ancient event, held once every 1,000 years, was the galaxy's most prestigious tournament, a battle where the greatest warriors from across the cosmos would face off in a test of skill, intellect, and raw power. The stakes were high. The victor would not only gain unmatched honor, but also a boon of unimaginable power, a relic of the universe's origins. Spectators from all corners of the galaxy filled the stands, each species more unique than the last. The Quinthorians, ethereal beings composed entirely of light, flickered in the air, their bodies shifting and merging with the surrounding energy fields. Beside them, the towering Draxu, with skin as hard as diamond and a roar that could shatter entire moons, stood silent and imposing. In the lower rows, the agile Viri, small humanoid creatures with wings of shimmering silk, whispered amongst themselves in a language only they understood. And in the very front row, the mysterious Ixri, an ancient race of telepathic entities who communicated only through thought, hovered in their translucent pods, their alien minds observing with a curiosity that transcended physical form. They had seen countless battles, yet the Zenith Clash still held their attention. The arena itself was a living entity, shifting its environment at will to challenge the combatants. One moment, the floor was a dense, gravity-defying maze of floating platforms. The next, it became an open field of jagged rocks and shifting sands. The warriors who participated in the Zenith Clash were not just fighters. They were legends, masters of every form of combat, from physical prowess to mental manipulation, each one bringing a unique style from their home worlds. And today, the entire galaxy would witness the rise of a new champion, a human named Kellen Voss, who had defied all odds to reach this moment. He was the first of his kind to compete in this prestigious event, a testament to the unyielding spirit of humanity. His name had already begun to echo across the stars, but today, his legacy would either be forged or forgotten. Kellen Voss stood at the edge of the arena's preparation zone, looking completely out of place, while the other competitors, tall, imposing beings with centuries of combat experience, pored over their elaborate weapons, meditated in absolute silence, or practiced complex, gravity-defying martial techniques. Kellen was casually sipping from a plastic water bottle, his expression more like that of someone about to step onto a local football field than an intergalactic battleground. His attire was simple, bordering on mundane, a worn leather jacket, scuffed boots, and a pair of faded jeans. His only noticeable piece of gear was a basic combat glove, attached to his wrist like it was something he wore for a quick workout, not a battle for galactic supremacy. No shimmering armor, no energy-enhanced gauntlets, no plasma blades or teleportation devices. Just Kellen and his stubborn, unrefined confidence. As the other warriors adjusted their advanced weaponry, Kellen leaned back against the wall, his hands in his pockets. "Anyone know where the nearest food court is?" "I'm starving," he asked, his voice casual, as if he just wandered in from a different dimension. A few of the other competitors glanced at him, their eyes flicking over his human form with a mix of disbelief and mild amusement. One of the taller figures, a 7-foot-tall Varkith warrior with muscular arms, stared at Kellen for a long moment before shaking his head. "You are prepared for the Zenith Clash?" The Varkith rumbled in disbelief, his voice deep enough to shake the air. Kellen grinned, stretching his arms above his head. "Yeah, prepared? Sure," he said with a wink, his smile unshaken. "But I've got a different approach. Less battle and more strategy." The Varkith let out a deep, guttural laugh. "Strategy? Against beings who can manipulate time and space." Kellen shrugged, completely unfazed. "We'll see, won't we?" he said, before turning his attention to the arena's glowing walls, as though casually inspecting the design. His relaxed demeanor was in stark contrast to the tension and focused energy of the other competitors, making him seem almost reckless. until the moment arrived that would prove just how dangerous that casualness could be. In the face of centuries-old combat traditions, Kellen didn't rely on mind-bending technologies or intricate martial arts. Instead, he brought something entirely different to the table: human ingenuity. The question was whether there would be enough to rewrite the rules of combat itself. The grand arena fell silent as the next challenger was announced: Lord Zyros, the undefeated champion of the Zenith Clash for over 5 centuries. His mere presence commanded the room, a towering figure draped in armor made of living plasma, his eyes glowing with an unyielding intensity. He was a being of immense power, born from the ancient warlords of the Zyrexian dynasty, a race known for their mastery over both body and mind. His name alone sent shivers down the spines of even the most experienced warriors. Lord Zyros was a living legend, revered and feared across the galaxy. His combat style was one of perfect symmetry, calculated, precise, and devastating. His skill in manipulating gravity, his telekinetic abilities, and his seamless blend of mind and matter had left every opponent in his wake either dead or broken. His record was flawless, and it was whispered that no human, no being, had ever lasted more than a few moments against him. As he surveyed the challengers for this year's Zenith Clash, Lord Zyros' gaze lingered on Kellen Voss. A faint smirk curled at the corner of his mouth as he reviewed the human's profile. A mere 5 feet 10 inches tall, no special abilities, no enhancements. Just a fighter from a primitive world, armed only with his human instincts and an overwhelming sense of arrogance. The betting odds on Kellen were astronomical, labeled statistical impossibility. A fighter out of his depth. Zyros' mind buzzed with a single thought: this will be amusing. Kellen, however, was undeterred. As he faced the imposing Zyros, his hands remained relaxed in his pockets. The warriors around him eyed him with a mixture of skepticism and disbelief, but Kellen didn't flinch. He knew what they thought. He had no enhancements, no experience in the arts of gravitic warfare or mind manipulation, just a guy who'd spent too many hours watching fights in his backyard back on Earth. "You seem confident human," Lord Zyros said, his voice like a calm storm. The way he looked at Kellen was the same way one might look at an insect preparing to be squashed. Kellen cracked his neck, his gaze steady. "Confidence is a good thing, right? Helps in a fight." Zyros chuckled, the sound low and menacing. "Fighting is an art, human. It is not something to be approached casually." Kellen gave a half-hearted shrug. "I guess we'll find out." The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a blade. The clash was inevitable, and everyone knew it would be a spectacle. For Kellen, the challenge wasn't just a fight. It was to survive. To go up against an ancient being, a master of all combat forms, with only his wits, his unpredictability, and his sheer determination. But what Kellen had that no one else could predict was that humans, in their wild unpredictability, had a potential to defy the very rules of combat. And Lord Zyros, with all his centuries of experience, was about to discover just how dangerous that unpredictability could be. Kellen Voss stood in the corner of the preparation area, the other combatants giving him a wide berth as he went through his warm-up. Instead of the silent meditation or energy-channeling rituals the others performed, Kellen was doing something no one had ever seen before. He dropped into a squat, then stood up into a few exaggerated punches in the air, each one followed by a loud, almost comical "hoo" sound. He kicked his legs out in a series of high, uncoordinated side kicks, sending a few nearby floating debris spiraling out of control. What exactly is he doing? A whisper went to the crowd of intergalactic warriors, some of whom had seen thousands of different combat styles. A towering insectoid Savari, its body covered in thick chitin and delicate, translucent wings, tilted its head and clicked its mandibles in confusion. "This is unusual," it murmured in its deep, resonating voice. Its antennae twitched nervously, sensing something unfamiliar in the air. Kellen, oblivious to the stares, wiped his brow and took a long sip of water. "Gotta loosen up, you know? I've learned that a tight body means a tight mind. You don't want that in the ring," he said, clearly having no idea just how perplexing his routine was to those around him. He then proceeded to stretch in what could only be described as a mix between a yoga pose and a dance move, arms extended and legs wide, humming an off-key tune under his breath. The crystalline beings in the vicinity emitted a series of high-pitched vibrations that echoed in the air, which to Kellen could have been interpreted as mockery or laughter. One of the more stoic warriors, a Varkith from the northern sectors of the galaxy, crossed his arms, observing Kellen with a raised brow. His massive forearms hung by his sides like tree trunks, and his dark red eyes fixed on Kellen's bizarre movements. Kellen caught his stare and grinned. "What? You never seen someone limber up before a fight? Trust me, these moves are tried and tested." The Varkith warrior remained silent, but the way his jaw clenched suggested he was far from amused. Meanwhile, a few of the highly disciplined Zerans, whose combat was rooted in precision and mental synchronization, watched in stunned silence, their telepathic communications buzzing in confusion. "Is this human serious?" One of them projected. "Is this how they train?" With a nonchalant shrug, Kellen adjusted his jacket, dusted off his pants, and gave a mock salute to his fellow competitors. All right, let's keep this simple," he said with a grin. "We're all gonna fight, so I'll keep it fun. Just like any street brawl. If it ain't broke, don't fix it." At this point, even the beings who had seen every form of combat imaginable began to shift uncomfortably. Kellen's unpredictability, his refusal to follow the ancient, sacred methods of battle, was throwing them off balance. Just as Kellen walked toward the arena's entrance, a small, insect-like creature from the audience chirped, its tiny wings buzzing in admiration. "Are you sure you're not underestimating your opponent, human?" it asked, clearly amused. Kellen threw a playful wink. "Underestimate him? Nah, I'm just getting started. You might want to sit back, this is going to be fun." As the creature's confused chirps filled the air, Kellen strolled into the arena, his eccentric style leaving an indelible impression. Little did they know, his quirks weren't just a form of entertainment. They were a secret weapon. Kellen's first match was against an opponent known as Zarek, a Zyrexian warlock, whose mind could manipulate the fabric of time itself. With a mere thought, Zarek could slow the flow of time, freezing opponents in mid-motion, leaving them vulnerable to his devastating attacks. His glowing eyes flickered as he floated above the arena, weaving intricate symbols with his hands. As if preparing to rewrite reality, the crowd held its breath. This was a real threat. Zarek had obliterated every competitor he'd faced for the last 100 years. Kellen, however, seemed unfazed. As Zarek's fingers twitched, causing ripples in time, Kellen merely shrugged, tossed his jacket aside, and grinned. "Time manipulation? Puffed! I got something better." He reached into his pocket, pulled out a cheap handheld laser pointer, and began zapping random spots around the arena. The red zipped across the walls, distracting the arena's floating holographic projectors and causing them to flicker. The quantum warlock narrowed his eyes, sensing a disturbance in his carefully orchestrated manipulation of time. "What are you?" But before he could finish, Kellen turned the pointer on him, the red beam dancing across Zarek's glowing chest. For a split second, Zarek's concentration faltered, and the flow of time snapped back to normal. Kellen darted forward in a blur of motion, throwing a playful punch to Zarek's gut. The warlock flinched, almost laughing, before he could stabilize himself. "You see, buddy," Kellen said with a grin, "you gotta keep things simple. Don't try to outsmart the human." The crowd erupted in disbelief as Zarek stumbled back, utterly confused by this human's ability to bypass his mighty power with something as ridiculous as a laser pointer. Next came Orla, a Gorgonian sorceress who could manipulate the very air around her, creating powerful vortexes that could tear through even the strongest of shields. She had already turned 3 combatants into swirling piles of dust with a single wave of her hand, her hair whipping in the artificial wind, her eyes burning with fury. She raised her hands, summoning a vortex that began pulling in everything around her. The debris, the floating platforms, and even the distant stars seemed to bend toward her. But Kellen? He simply grabbed a nearby metal pole, walked up to the edge of the vortex, and yelled at the top of his lungs. "Hey! Stop! I'm trying to fight here." Orla's eyes narrowed. "You think you can disrupt my windstorm with your voice?" she scoffed, her winds intensifying. Kellen held up the pole, pretending to examine it as if it were the most serious thing in the universe. "Oh, no. I'm just gonna have a chat with this wind." Then, without hesitation, he began to yell again, loudly, repeatedly, and nonsensically. about how his mom wouldn't let him have ice cream before dinner. It was ridiculous. It was absurd. Orla's concentration shattered. She blinked, then looked around at the others, utterly baffled by Kellen's nonsense. Was he mocking her? Was he mocking the very art of battle? Before she could react, Kellen leaped forward and swung the pole straight at her, not with precision of a practiced fighter, but with the raw energy of a human in sheer desperation. The blow knocked her off balance, sending her tumbling into the vortex she had summoned herself. The crowd roared in bewildered laughter and awe. "Sometimes," Kellen said, dusting himself off with a cocky smile, "you just gotta confuse the hell out of them." By the time Kellen faced his third opponent, a telepathic gladiator from the Minari cluster, the arena was on fire with excitement. This time, his opponent conveyed the mind of anyone who met his gaze, forcing them to relive their worst nightmares. The Minari gladiator was known for breaking the wills of even the strongest, most indomitable warriors with mere glance. The Minari warrior's eyes locked onto Kellen's, his psychic presence overwhelming the human's mind. He grinned, knowing victory was near. But Kellen wasn't fazed. He smiled back, leaning casually against the wall. "Man, this whole mind game thing is so overrated." And then, just as the gladiator's psychic influence started to twist Kellen's mind, he snapped his fingers and yelled, "All right, let's make this a bit more interesting, huh? I'm going to think about pizza. That's right, pepperoni, extra cheese, thin crust. Yeah, you like that, don't you?" The Minari gladiator's expression faltered as Kellen's thoughts began to flood his mind. Images of pizza toppings, sauce, and dough spinning like a mental whirlwind. The gladiator's hold on Kellen weakened as the mind games became a chaotic mess of pizzas, absurd scenarios, and utter nonsense. The gladiator's concentration broke entirely. Kellen seized the opportunity and launched himself forward, delivering a quick but powerful uppercut that sent the telepathic gladiator reeling backward. The arena erupted in applause and laughter, a mixture of confusion and admiration. Kellen's unpredictability had once again turned the tide, proving that no matter how ancient the technique or how advanced the opponent's abilities, nothing was more dangerous than a human who refused to be normal. Grandmaster Zarek sat in his private chamber, the glowing blue orb of his meditation stone casting a soft light over the ancient tapestries that adorned the walls. His mind was still reeling from his first defeat at the hands of Kellen Voss. He had studied every combatant, every technique known across the galaxy, and yet the human had defied every rule, every expectation. Zarek's fingers trembled as he replayed the footage of their match over and over in his mind. The sound of Kellen's absurdly timed laser pointer, his mocking voice, the way he had dismissed the very fabric of time with nothing more than a flick of his wrist and a casual chuckle. The warlock had always been an advocate of control, believing that the mastery of time was the highest form of combat. How had he lost this? "This is impossible," Zarek muttered under his breath, his mind whirling as the realization began to settle in. The human hadn't simply beaten him. He had broken him. Zarek stood abruptly, pacing the room, his long robes trailing behind him. The warlock was accustomed to challengers respecting the ancient traditions of combat, the mental discipline, the years of training, the respect for power, for control. It was always about imposing order, bending the universe to your will. Kellen had not played by those rules. He had danced around them like a child playing a game, an unwitting rebel in a world where rebellion was never the answer. "He's not breaking the rules," Zarek whispered, his voice tinged with disbelief. "He's breaking the game itself." A flicker of frustration passed through him, followed by a strange sense of admiration. Zarek had spent centuries perfecting his art, studying the minds of great warriors and the intricate patterns of time. Yet this human, this child, had turned it all into a mockery, and that, more than anything, unsettled him. The warlock had always believed in hierarchy, in the sanctity of tradition. His entire being was built upon the belief that combat was sacred, that victory was earned through precision and power. But Kellen's approach, a chaotic, unrefined storm, was something entirely different. It was unpredictable. Zarek's brow furrowed as he paused in his pacing, the weight of the realization pressing down on him. Unpredictable. That was the key. Kellen wasn't simply defying tradition. He was revealing the cracks in it, the places where the old ways had become brittle, where they could no longer contain the creativity and spontaneity of a human spirit. The traditions are flawed, Zarek muttered bitterly, and he knows it. The warlock's hands clenched at his sides. He had fought for centuries, striving for perfection, but here was a creature who was impervious to the rules he had so carefully constructed. And what was worse, Kellen wasn't just an anomaly. He was effective. The more Zarek replayed the footage, the more he saw it. Every strike, every unexpected move was designed to throw his opponent off balance, to unravel precision he had spent a lifetime perfecting. There was no elegance, no perfect form to Kellen's style. It was messy, raw, but it worked. The realization hit him like a thunderclap. This wasn't a simple mismatch of skills. This was a shift in the very nature of combat. Does he not respect the traditions? Zarek whispered, a pang of both envy and fury creeping into his heart. Or is he above them? He stood there, staring at the shimmering holograms of Kellen's final victory. The human had done what no one else had ever dared. He had ignored the ancient rules and won anyway. And as the warlock stood in the quiet of his chamber, the growing frustration morphed into a realization, one that would shape his every move in the upcoming rounds. If Kellen could break the game, maybe it was time to redefine the rules altogether. A.S. Kellenvoss prepared the final round of the Nexus Prime Combat Tournament. The air was thick with tension. The arena, once buzzing with chatter and excitement, had grown eerily quiet. Every spectator in the vast coliseum was watching intently, their eyes fixed on the human who defied all expectations. The betting markets had gone into meltdown. Across the galaxy, the odds had shifted to error. Does not compute. Kellen's name flashed on every screen, and for the first time in the tournament's history, it seemed like the data was no longer able to process the absurdity of his ascent. No one could comprehend how a human, someone with no known combat style, no deep training, had made it this far, defeating opponents whose skills had been honed for millennia. Whispers rippled through the audience like waves across a distant ocean. The dignitaries in the VIP sections, usually cold and calculating, exchanged puzzled looks. This was no longer a competition of strength or technique. This was something else. Even the seasoned warriors who had come to witness the final rounds were watching with wide eyes, their focus split between the arena and Kellen. Why was he succeeding? How was he continually breaking the rules and, against all odds, coming out on top? One particularly arrogant fighter from the Navarian ranks leaned forward in his seat, shaking his head in disbelief. "This human's an anomaly," he muttered to his companion, who nodded in agreement. "I've never seen anything like it. He's just guessing his way to victory." But even as he said it, there was a note of doubt in his voice. Perhaps Kellen was more than that, and the officials, those who were the keepers of tradition, had long since been forced to reassess their stance. The head referee, a towering, crystalline being known as Verisaph, shifted uncomfortably in their seat as the arena's massive holographic display showed the final matchups. Their neural scans had predicted Zarek, or perhaps the Minari Gladiator, would emerge victorious, but they had not accounted for this. Kellen had shattered their predictions, their perfect calculations. He had thrown tradition itself into chaos. "He doesn't fight like the others," Verisaph muttered, a spark of curiosity lighting up their normally impassive face. "This human, he refuses to play by the rules." Kellen stood at the edge of the arena, his trademark grin still in place, completely unaware of the whirlwind of confusion and intrigue swirling around him. He was a human in an alien world, surrounded by beings capable of unimaginable feats, beings who had trained their whole lives for this moment. And yet here he was, a wild card, playing the game like it was a joke. He wasn't even taking it seriously, or so it seemed. Around him, the energy had shifted. The alien fighters, now tense with uncertainty, eyed each other warily. They had expected a match where skill, power, and control would reign supreme. But now, they weren't sure what to expect. What if Kellen's unpredictable style was the key to unlocking something greater? What if, by refusing to follow tradition, he was tapping into a new form of combat they had never imagined? In the stands, the spectators, those who had once laughed at the thought of human winning, were now holding their breath. The once dismissive hum of conversation had quieted, leaving only the sound of anticipation. Would Kellen finally be taken down? Or would he, against all reason, become the first human ever to claim victory in the tournament of Nexus Prime? Kellen didn't notice the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He simply stepped into the arena, hands in his pockets, looking like he was about to take a leisurely stroll through the park. His grin remained, but beneath it, there was a glimmer of resolve. No matter how impossible the odds were, he had one thing no one else had, a mind that refused to be boxed in. And in that moment, the stakes were no longer about the tournament's outcome. They were about something far more important, the very nature of combat itself. Could Kellen, the human who had rewritten the rules, really pull off the impossible? The final confrontation was about to begin, and the universe watched with bated breath. The final confrontation in the Nexus Prime arena was nothing short of legendary. Kellen Voss stood across from Zarek, the Warlock of Time. The two combatants locked in a silent, electric standoff. The arena's shimmering force fields hummed with an ancient power, the tension so thick that even the air seemed to vibrate. The galaxy's most brilliant minds had gathered to witness this clash of ideologies, tradition versus chaos, precision versus adaptability. Zarek was the epitome of ancient combat mastery. His ceremonial robes rippled like liquid silver, each movement graceful and deliberate, as though the very fabric of time obeyed his will. His eyes, gleaming with centuries of wisdom, focused on Kellen with an intensity that would have sent lesser beings running for cover. Kellen, on the other hand, was the embodiment of unpredictability. He stood with his hands casually shoved in his pockets, his posture relaxed, his grin wide and mischievous. He had faced the greatest warriors of the galaxy and survived, not through brute strength or refined technique, but by simply refusing to play by anyone's rules. The signals sounded, and the final showdown began. Zarek moved first. With a flick of his wrist, the air around him twisted and shimmered. Time itself began to buckle under his will, looping and folding upon itself in an intricate dance. A mandala of temporal distortions formed, each loop an intricately woven snare designed to confuse and trap his opponent. The spectators gasped, watching in awe as Zarek's control over time became a visible, crackling force. Kellen, however, wasn't impressed. As the temporal loops closed in, he simply pulled out his phone from his pocket and tapped it a few times. "Sorry," Kellen said with a shrug. "I've got this cool metronome app. It's a lifesaver for situations like these." Zarek's brow furrowed as Kellen tapped the screen. The metronome app began its rhythmic clicking, and in an instant, the time loops began to falter. They wavered, unraveling as the consistent sound of the metronome reverberated through the arena, causing Zarek's temporal assault to lose its precision. The Warlock's face shifted from confusion to a mixture of disbelief and frustration. His perfect control over time was being undone by a phone. What is this trickery? Zarek hissed, trying to recalibrate his attack. But it was too late. Kellen wasn't just reacting. He was adapting, laughing as he watched the loops around him crumble. "I told you," Kellen said with a grin. "Resonant frequencies work wonders." The Warlock, ever the master of precision, snapped his fingers and attempted a counterattack. Time warped again, this time attempting to slow Kellen's movements to a crawl. The world around him shimmered into a blurry haze, and everything seemed to stretch. Kellen, however, simply spun in place, his arms flailing comically as he mockingly mimicked a slow-motion fight scene from an old holo-vid. "Oh no, I'm so slow," Kellen said, his voice dripping with mock concern. "How will I ever defeat you now?" Zarek's eyes blazed with fury. He charged forward, forming a lance of pure temporal energy, his precision unmatched. With a shout, he thrust it forward, intending to pierce Kellen's heart. The blow seemed certain, until Kellen sidestepped, pulling a low, exaggerated dodge that nearly sent him crashing into a nearby pillar. Zarek blinked in disbelief. The human had avoided his strike, not with the calculated grace of a trained fighter, but by stumbling. "You really are frustrating," Zarek muttered. "You don't even respect the art of combat. This is chaos. It's madness." "Well, if it's any consolation," Kellen replied, glancing at the crowd, "I'm having a blast." He jumped into a somersault, landing behind Zarek with the agility of someone who had no business being here in the first place. Zarek's expression shifted again, from frustration to grudging admiration. For all his mastery, Kellen had turned his own perfection against him. The human wasn't fighting with time. He was mocking it, bending it to his whims. But Zarek wasn't done yet. He called upon his ultimate technique, an ancient, forbidden spell known as the Chronomancer's Veil. Time itself would fracture, reshaping the battlefield into a nightmarish illusion of his choosing. With a wave of his hand, the world around them began to distort. The arena rippled, shifting through dozens of alternate timelines in the blink of an eye, each one more dangerous and surreal than the last. Kellen didn't flinch. Instead, he pulled out a small, absurd object from his pocket. "What's that?" Zarek demanded, narrowing his eyes. Kellen raised it to his lips and blew. A bubble of translucent energy formed, floating above his head. "It's a bubble wand," Kellen said, completely unfazed. "They say it works great against illusions. Worth a shot." And with that, Kellen flicked the wand. The bubble expanded, shimmering like the surface of a soap bubble, and in an instant, the distortions around them began to clear. Zarek's illusions faltered, unraveling like poorly spun threads. The audience erupted in disbelief. The Warlock, one of the oldest and most respected combatants in the galaxy, had been undone by a human with a bubble wand and a metronome. Zarek's frustration reached its peak. With a roar, he launched himself at Kellen, but this time the human was ready. Kellen dodged, spun, and with a light-hearted shout of "Catch me if you can," sent Zarek tumbling into a pile of glowing time fragments. The arena fell silent as Kellen stood tall, wiping his hands as if the entire fight had been little more than a practice session. "Well," he said with a wink, "guess you'll need to update your combat strategies, huh?" Zarek lay on the ground, staring up at the stars, completely defeated. And in that moment, the entire galaxy realized that combat had changed forever. The dust of final confrontation had barely settled, and yet the entire arena was still vibrating with the energy of the impossible. Kellen Voss stood tall, his casual grin unchanged, as the crowd erupted into thunderous applause. He had done it. Against all odds, he had defeated Zarek, the Warlock of Time, and rewritten the rules of combat forever. Zarek, now seated in the center of the arena, was breathing heavily, his once pristine robes now tattered and torn. The great master of temporal manipulation, who had for centuries dominated the arena, was left in a state of stunned reflection. The universe's most esteemed warriors had been bested not by superior strength, not by overwhelming skill, but by a human who defied every expectation. Kellen, still wearing his trademark laid-back smile, raised his arms in mock celebration, basking in the glory of his improbable victory. But as the applause continued, his eyes lingered on the defeated Warlock. Zarek had no words, only a slow, begrudging nod. In that small gesture, Kellen understood. His methods, his unpredictability, had disrupted something much bigger than just a tournament. They had shaken the very foundation of what combat was supposed to be. As the officials moved in to crown the victor, Kellen casually walked over to Zarek. He extended a hand, an unexpected gesture of camaraderie. Zarek looked at it for a long moment, before shaking it firmly, his fingers twitching in reluctant acknowledgement of the human's victory. "You've done something no one else could," Zarek said quietly, his voice tinged with something akin to respect. "But you've also done something we never considered. You've made the rules irrelevant." Kellen chuckled, still looking far more relaxed than any champion should. "I don't think the rules were the problem, Zarek. I think everyone just got too comfortable with them." He paused, glancing around at the stunned spectators. "Perfection is nice, but it's also predictable." Zarek's eyes narrowed slightly, his thoughts turning inward. The idea was revolutionary. Perfection, something he had sought his entire life, wasn't the key to progress. Evolution required change, and change meant embracing the unexpected, the unrefined. Kellen had done exactly that. As the crowd's cheers grew louder, Kellen glanced back at them, then up at the towering structure of the Nexus Prime Coliseum. The arena had stood for eons, a monument to the traditions of countless species. It had seen battles, triumphs, and defeats. But now it was witnessing something more profound, the birth of a new paradigm. "See," Kellen said to Zarek with a wink. "Rules aren't limits. They're just opportunities for someone to come along and break them. Zarek could only nod. He had spent his life mastering time, manipulating precision, crafting perfect strategies. But in the end, it was Kellen's chaotic, unpredictable nature that had outwitted him. And in that moment, the galaxy understood. Combat, once a domain of rigid traditions and carefully honed techniques, would never be the same. Kellen's methods, his refusal to adhere to norms, had shattered the status quo. He had shown everyone that there was power in adaptability, in embracing the unexpected, in making the game your own. As Kellen stood victorious, the true implications of his victory began to dawn on the galaxy. It wasn't just about combat anymore. It was about challenging the very way things had always been. His legacy would not be one of brute strength or military prowess, but a simple truth. The future belongs to those who dare to rewrite the rules. With a final look toward the horizon, Kellen stepped out of the arena. His battle was won, not just with fists or strategy, but with the audacity to break the mold. As the cheers faded into the distance, he couldn't help but smile. The galaxy had been shaken, and in the wake of it all, the art of combat had been redefined forever. A.S. Kellen walked off the arena floor. His victory was far from the end. It was just the beginning. News of his unconventional triumph spread like wildfire, sparking heated debates across the galaxy. Combat academies, long untouched by anything other than rigid traditions, began to reassess everything they thought they knew. Old warriors with decades of experience found themselves questioning their methods. New fighters, inspired by Kellen's audacity, began to form their own unpredictable styles. Across countless star systems, there were whispers. Some worried, some were excited, and others, they were already planning their own rebellions. Back at the Federation's Central Command, a message blinked onto Kellen's screen. Mission accomplished. New directive. Explore further. Kellen grinned, typing a response with one hand, while casually leaning back in his chair. Sure thing, he typed. Just make sure they bring the coffee this time. As the transmission went through, a new chapter in the galaxy's history began to take shape. With Kellen's victory, the art of combat was no longer bound by ancient traditions. It was now a living, breathing thing, waiting to evolve with every challenge, every fight, every unpredictable moment. Across the galaxy, one question lingered in the air. What's next? And somewhere, deep in the heart of a distant planet, a new warrior, untrained, unrefined, but brimming with potential, stared at the stars, knowing that the galaxy was wide open for the taking. Guess we'll find out soon enough, Kellen muttered to himself with a grin, already thinking about the next great challenge.